Good evening, morning, welcome. Welcome to George Washington University's Intro to Political Violence and Terrorism program in Homeland Security, Week 5. So, announcements, Adobe Connect, I should say WebEx session, 8 February, this coming Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Group 2, we'll go in the shoot on that one. And I just want to say is, what we'll do is we'll have the next Adobe Connect session when Group 3 briefs 2 weeks later. We'll do a job talk. Careers in the federal government, careers in the bureaucracy, federal contractors, and I'll give you my insights on trying to get hired into the federal bureaucracy. Please if you have any questions on jobs and issues, and as I see myself, I'm a resource for you on that. Please shoot me a note beforehand so I can get a better understanding of what you're looking for. And then the paper 2, which I'll give a little bit more guidance here, that's due on 10 February, 11:59 p.m. So please get your paper in, get your presentation in if you're in Group 2. So I've graded everyone's paper 1. There might be a couple people who were a little bit late on that I still need to get to it, but just some key points. Far too much background. Please get to the point of your papers. Be brutal about the point. I don't need history. I don't need to talk about that background. Just really narrow it down. Pin the history to your argument. So if you're going to talk about history, what's the history of the FLN or the Irgun or the Orlando shooting, don't give a 1.5 page start of Nidal Hasan's history, who's the Fort Hood shooter. Go right into why you think he was radicalized or that his radicalization led to it being called terrorism, and then talk about it. Don't give me the background. I got it. It's off-putting when you start a paper, in 1979, Nidal Hasan was born, and then this he did this, and then this he did this. Please, get to your argument points. The 4 criteria. A lot of you pinned your arguments on those 4 criteria that I talk about as terrorism. Sub-state actor, attacking civilians, political criteria. And that's okay, but I bring up that in the lecture, there are issues with those 4 criteria. You can't just put those criteria and use those as your method to determine what's terrorism or not. Because again, there's issues with all those points. So pinning your argument to those 4 criteria might not be the best way to argue whether a certain case is terrorism or not. Association. This is especially important when you're talking about the Orlando shooter or the Fort Hood shooter. Does their association with terrorists make them terrorists? Some people say yes. Nidal Hasan was communicating with a known terrorist. That makes him a terrorist. The Orlando shooter pledged allegiance to a known terrorist organization, ISIS. That makes him a terrorist. I think you have to dig down a little bit deep, though. There is a difference between, there's a spectrum here. If I am radicalized by internet postings from ISIS, and then I go out and do something, does that make me a terrorist? Does that association strong enough? If I am just engaging in essentially a chat with Anwar al-Awlaki, and I don't mean to denigrate it, but it wasn't plotting those messages between Nidal Hasan and Anwar al-Awlaki. It wasn't financial support to conduct terrorism. It certainly wasn't orders to conduct terrorism. It was more kind of a fanboy emails. Does that make him associated with terrorism? Does Omar Mateen, does that make him associated with terrorism because of he pledged allegiance after ISIS, even though ISIS had no coordination with that attack and radicalized him over the internet? Does that make him a terrorist because he pledged allegiance afterward? Let's throw this on the other spectrum. If someone is radicalized through a right-wing website or right-wing propaganda, does that automatically make him terrorist? I think we would say it if it was Islamic, but if it was right-wing terrorism, we might not have that same judgment. So association needs to be defined a little bit more clearly. And then passive voice, I don't want to get into your fifth grade grammar teacher's lesson here, but far too many people use passive voice in their writing, and I don't think a lot of people know what passive voice is. This sentence, the ball was bounced by the boy, is passive. Ball is a direct object. Was bounced is the verb. A boy is the subject. So if it's direct object, verb, subject, that's a passive sentence. If it's subject, verb, direct object, that is an active sentence. There's a lot of confusion what passive voice is. I even deal with it in my day job where people don't know what passive voice is. Just be cognizant of what it is. And I hate to say this, but if you're writing tight papers, label out subject, verb, direct object, indirect object, like you're, again, back in grammar school or, English class in grammar school, just to make your writing a lot more clear. I do that still now in my day job. So those are kind of the issues with the papers. Again, I graded about 90% of them. If you still are waiting, there's maybe onesies or twosies because you handed in late or it was a little bit late. I should have those wrapped up early this week. So review of week 4, terrorism adaptation. And one thing to look through is the variables for success and failure. That's the key theme that you hopefully got from your readings of the terrorist group you looked at from my lecture. Why do certain groups succeed and others fail? And are we seeing these schisms in ISIS right now? Is ISIS failing because it became too radicalized and it broke off in different components? Or are we in, the second quarter, and I'm speaking this right before the Super Bowl, but are we only in the second quarter of the fight against ISIS? Are we seeing these patterns across the board? And then the WMD terrorism dirty war, again, it's a movie, but I think there's lessons learned from that movie that are applicable on acquisition of WMD, first response of WMD, testifying before, in this case, Parliament, or testifying before Congress on issues of national security. These were very relevant issues going forward, and I also give that movie, I hope it kind of inspires you to in this career field, especially if you're in WMD career field, what the issues with or when failure occurs, what are the consequences? So again, I'm a little hesitant at giving movies out for a graduate school assignment, but I think that's a pretty good perspective that's relevant. And then the 2 case studies, again, Om Shinrikyo and the Rajneeshi case study. Om Shinrikyo specifically, the CNAS article does a good overview of what Om Shinrikyo did and what they failed to do, why were they successful. And I want you to think, that's why I signed it, why is Om successful while Al-Qaeda was not? And what are the barriers to success that Om was able to break through and why other groups are not? And that's going to be a big part of your thinking like that is going to be a part of your paper going for this week. And then the Rajneeshi case study, I actually saw a documentary called Wild Wild Country on Netflix. I gave you a short snippet in the lecture, but the actually documentary was very interesting, and it showed the history of the Rajneeshi, and it wasn't just this WMD attack, but they had a very detailed history beforehand, which was interesting. So paper 2. This is what I'm looking for, 1,200 to 1,500. 1,500 words max. I'm going to be, as opposed to the first paper, I'm going to be really strict on it, because the whole thing is to be concise in your writing. So if it's 1,501 words, don't hand it to me, excluding the bibliography and the cover page. But I'm looking for concision in this paper. The research, again, there's not a whole lot of extensive research you need to do for this, but I do want you to get a little bit into the science of some of these issues. And the actual articles are in the tab in the week 5 folder so you could see what to choose from. And again, you're given 3 articles, 3 threat scenarios. Read them all, and then choose one. Choose one. Do not do all 3. And ask, is this a threat? Why or why not? And just in real world, how this happens is your boss or a congressman or a member of the state legislature, if you're at the state level, will read this, because these are all in the open literature, and then say, do I need to worry about this? And they'll go to somebody like you and say, do I need to worry about this? And you will have, in this case, you have a week. In the real world, you have a couple of hours. Write me a quick paper if this is something I need to worry about. So that's kind of, it's designed to be a real world scenario. So is this a threat? Why or why not? And then look at the production, transportation, and dissemination, which were issues we just talked about in this past week. Are those hindrances? Can a terrorist overcome those issues and actually strike the U.S. homeland? So you have the AQAP ricin scenario, you have the Syria sarin scenario, and the ISIS bubonic plague, the laptop of doom scenario as well. So preview. Again, week 5 looks at counterterrorism policy, and again, we have to keep going in this course. I know it's hard because you have a paper to write and different readings, but that's the nature of a compressed course. So there's Akaria readings, you have the PBS Frontline, you have the Hoffman reading as well, and then the discussion, you're going to look at both U.S. counterterrorism strategy and Israeli counterterrorism strategy, and look for lessons learned, and EU counterterrorism strategy as well, I apologize. And look for lessons learned. What can the Israelis teach us? What can we teach the Israelis? What have we done well? What have we done poorly? What do the Israelis do? Good, bad. What does the EU, European Union, do good or bad? And think about that just, again, going forward for this week, and that's going to be a part of your paper 3 that's due in a few weeks. So if there's questions or issues, please let me know, and I look forward to the discussion board.